This is a pretty basic lower body stretch, some pretty standard stretches. Nice to do on the ground. First one I like to do is just a generic sit and reach, stretching the hamstrings. I start by grabbing my shins. As I get a little more loose, I'll lean forward more and grab my toes. You should be able to grab your toes. If you can't, stay at your shins and try to sort of pull yourself forward. I'll hold the static stretches for 10 to 15 seconds. Lots of different things I've read over the years, between 10 to 30 seconds for holding stretches. It's often 2 or 3 nice long breaths for me, and with each breath I try to sink a little bit deeper into it. After those, I typically will do the standard sit and reach test sort of stretch. Again, I usually start holding my shins, pulling there a little bit, and then typically moving forward. Try to keep my toes flexed the entire time when I'm stretching. I find it gets the hamstrings a little bit more. Some people might find that this stretch actually works their calves a bit more or their lower back a little bit more. Then I'll go into sort of this pretzel-like one. Some people have a hard time understanding what's going on, so if you need to, pause the video and take a look. You'll end up stretching, depending on your area that's the tightest. Maybe you'll be stretching one of your glutes or your quad or your hip, maybe your back. Please notice that I'm trying to keep a pretty neutral spine while I'm doing this, and I pinch in that upper thigh. Then I switch over. You can see the one foot gets tucked under. I find, not so much anymore, but when I first did this, I would be better balanced on one side than the other. I think you can hear the background there. That's life. Next, I'll move into a pretty standard groin stretch. I don't apply too much pressure to my inner thighs here, but I do sometimes push down a little bit while I try to bring in my toes or my heels, whatever you want to call it. So we've done our hamstrings and our hips, basically, the inner and outer parts of the hips. But this one I find gets the front of my hips pretty good. My back leg, in this case my left leg, is sort of digging into the ground, and I'm almost pulling forward with my lunge and my hips. And I find that really gets my hip flexors pretty nicely. So that back leg is sort of dug into the carpet while I lunge forward, thrusting my hip a little bit forward. Next, I'll move into my quads. This is often done standing up, and I've seen people do a variation of this where they're sitting up a little bit more, but that puts an undue amount of strain on their knee. So often I'd stand up. I think I would have been framed out of the video. That's why I decided to do it on the ground. And then you'll see the same view on the other side. And I grab at the ankle, not the toes. Grabbing at the toes, you put a little too much strain on the tendons that connect through the foot. So I grab at the ankle. I'm trying to keep my leg straight and maybe making sure, if anything, that my hips are forward a little bit to emphasize the stretch on the quads. Next, I'll move into the calves, and I just go into a pretty standard yoga pose called downward dog. I obviously don't have the best downward dog pose, looking at my back there, but I try to keep my heels flat on the ground and my legs straight. If I need to make it harder, I can move my hands closer, or if I need to make it easier, I move my hands away. Here I'm going to rock them back and forth a little bit, and what that gets is the Achilles and the soleus a little differently. And again, all these stretches will vary based on what you worked out, what's sore, or your flexibility. So there we go.